आजादी की जंग लड़ने वाले मेरे दोस्तों, आजादी चाहिए तो उसकी कीमत खून दे के चुकानी होगी। तुम मुझे खून दो, मैं तुम्हें आजादी दूंगा।
आईएनए की बागी फौजियों पर अंग्रेज देशद्रोह का मुकदमा चलाएंगे।
उन तीनों के बचने के चांसेस कम हैं।
This trial and its judgment will be remembered throughout history.
Hello and welcome to a brand new edition of India's World on Rajya Sabha Television with me, Frank Pereira. Away from the arc lights that accompany China's OBOR project, India has been quietly working on creating connectivity grids in its neighborhood and moving beyond physical connectivity to energy as a tool of connectivity. From Indonesia to Mauritius, India is working on a web of energy relationships that seeks to leverage India's position as a big source of petroleum products, sharing of technology and building interdependencies. Mauritius, one of India's closest partners in the Indian Ocean region, could become a hub for petroleum storage and bunkering, for which India has started building infrastructure. India already supplies petroleum products to Mauritius from Mangalore refineries, as well as being a retail player in that country. As a petroleum hub, Mauritius can secure its own energy supplies, while India can use it to market in other parts of Africa. On the other side of the Indian Ocean, India and Indonesia are beginning an energy relationship. Indonesia is one of the world's bigger sources of hydrocarbons and has been in and out of OPEC. On this edition of India's World, we will analyze why energy diplomacy is important to India, with a special focus on China. Joining me on the program today are Hardeep Puri, former permanent representative to the UN, Subhomoy Bhattacherjee, author India's Coal Story, and Anujesh Dwivedi, partner Deloitte India. Subhomoy, I'd like to begin with you, of course. Where is India and China's energy consumption really heading, and why is energy diplomacy so important to us?
We are growing. If we are growing at the rate 7%, 8%, you have to ensure that energy consumption keeps pace. If it does not, then the growth sort of comes up with a jerk. That's what we have seen over the last several decades in our vis-a-vis the coal sector, that it couldn't keep up the pace. So energy security is pretty much a part of countries' development security positioning. Now, if that's the case, not only is India doing the same thing, but China is continuing with its growth story. So these two countries today provide the world's biggest appetite for energy, and this is the race which is going to determine essentially how 21st century world faces off. So most of the issues would be basically dependent on where India stands and what China stands, and in terms of which particular type of energy source. So is India going to be dependent on coal, or is India going to sort of shift gradually towards gas? Simultaneously, what does China do? Because China is also extremely coal dependent. Does it shift to gas, or does it try to jump over into renewable energy? So these are basically determining, as you just pointed out in the early stage, that for instance the Mauritius put which India is trying to do, will determine how the shape of relationships between these two countries square off. In fact, it's not surprising that you would find that India and China's face-off in the last few years have all been around the issue of sourcing of oil, gas, South China Sea, where it has been there. India has sort of found that in Bay of Bengal, Chinese fleet is coming in with energy sources.
Right.
So this is the basic thrust of these two economies. It's somewhat similar to what happened in the last century between, say, the Allied and the Germany, the landlocked in European countries. It's a fairly similar one, but of course this will have its different contours.
Sure. Ambassador, I'd like to bring you in now. How can India use energy as a diplomatic tool?
Well, first of all, I think before we talk about leveraging energy or any other issue in diplomacy, I'd just like to comment briefly on what my dear friend has said. I mean, he's absolutely right. But let's start at the beginning. India and China are two large countries and two large economies. Populations of 1.2 billion, the other one 1.3 or 1.4 billion. Growing economies. China is a $12 trillion economy. We are $2.5 trillion and growing. So energy is an essential requirement. He uses the word energy security in the context of development. I would go a step further. I think energy security, the way this is evolving, including with China, is an essential component of national security. And I would be averse to looking at issues of national security only in terms of cross-border movement of non-state military actors or countries using terror as an instrument of policy. I would look at national security in terms of energy security, issues relating to water and so on, because that's where the future problems are going to arise. Now, in the case of China, I think both countries have a very high reliance on fossil fuels, and I think they're trying to move away from that. And as Subhomoy says, both countries are also having a high import dependence. Both countries are trying to go into cleaner this thing. But we also have some problems. I mean, I think if you look at it in terms of the imperative of existence and cooperation, the two countries should really be cooperating at the optimal level in order for this to be a win-win for both sides. But I'm afraid I see friction.
Is there enough scope for convergence?
There is scope for convergence. We actually have a mechanism to discuss these things. And at some stage in the discussion, I want to come in to say that I feel we are not using those mechanisms effectively. It's not intended as criticism. But somebody has been smart enough to realize that energy security and issues relating to energy are an integral part of what is called the India-China Strategic Economic Dialogue. This has been around since 2010. But it has had 4 meetings. But
unfortunately, it gets lost in all the rhetoric, doesn't it?
Well, I would hope that behind the rhetoric, when serious people sit down and discuss these issues, they are able to convey to each other that, in effect, by cooperating across the spectrum, there is a win-win possibility for both sides.
Okay, sure. Let's come back to the mechanisms a little ahead in the program, but let me bring in Anujesh Dwivedi into the picture as well. How does India secure its energy needs?
See, irrespective of that is India and China plan for, a bulk of the energy requirement of both these countries is going to be met from resources which are lying outside both the countries. So both these countries will continue to depend on especially oil-related resources outside their own home ground. Irrespective of that, I think there's a lot of synergy in terms of what can be done within these countries on the electricity side of things, where oil plays a smaller role, but coal, natural gas, renewable energy plays a much bigger role. And both these countries have done a fabulous job there. I think China is way ahead of us. They're having an installed capacity of close to 100,000 megawatts. 13 lakh megawatts, whereas we have been very rapid in adding generation capacities in the last 8 to 9 years. We have become the 3rd largest country in terms of installed capacity. And also, I think moving beyond thermal generation, that is been primarily coal, both in India and China, where they are both self-reliant. We are going to be the 2 topmost countries embracing renewable energy generation capacities at a very, very fast pace. And while India is more focused on the deployment side of things, I think China is way ahead. If you look at solar, the way they have pioneered the technology evolution there and the manufacturing on solar, I think there is a big partnership that is already happening. Bulk of the generation capacities which are getting added in India on the solar side have equipment sourced from China. I think there is an unsaid partnership. This could be formalized to take things to the next level.
Sure. That's a very valid point that he's raising, Subhomoy. China is the largest producer of solar energy in the world, and India is looking for cleaner sources of energy. So could there be some kind of convergence there as far as solar energy is concerned?
Yeah, Frank, just to put a point to it, energy investment is a very long-term gestation investment. You can't be thinking of energy now to have been produced, say, just 2 years ago, I mean, in terms of the investment. So what you are seeing today on the Indian map of energy sources that have been deployed is a result of decisions taken about, say, 15, 20 years ago. Now, that is the level of, so what we are going to do, say, in 2030, will have to be decided now. It can't be later than that. Now, if that is the case, then whether solar, for instance, or whether it will be gas-based or whether it will be coal-based, these decisions need to be taken right now. As Ambassador Puri said, the problem is that there is an enormous amount of national security involved in the choices, therefore, that you take, because with such a long gestation investment, to decide that we will abandon all of our or large part of our coal resources and depend on gas as the intermediate fuel and then move on to solar is a question that would mean India abrogating a severe part of its safety to go in for questing for oil, for energy abroad. Now, these again raises the issue of political national sovereignty, and that is something where issues need to be really considered very, very carefully.
Sure, indeed, yes, that's a very valid point that Subhomoy is making, and something that you touched upon earlier as well, Ambassador.
We are going to go ahead into clean and renewable sources, irrespective of what our resources are. I think this energy and clean energy are riding on a public wave of this thing, so that there is some of it will happen. What will be the mix, I don't know. But there are several contradictions in policy. And you try and make the best of policy. I think this is a win-win that you go in for more solar. But at the same time, you have to be conscious of the fact that the Chinese have over capacity. They've invested a lot in photovoltaic, in panels, etc., in the production of all that, and they have to offload that. So, and I think in order for us to meet our domestic priorities, for some ministries, we will be importing large amounts of that. It's a process which is already beginning. But at the same time, you have this Make in India component. So if you're going to buy ready-made photovoltaic panels and all these things from outside, from whatever be the source, then you are to that extent locking yourself into a certain process.
But it makes sense economically, doesn't it?
It does now, especially since the prices come down.
Yes.
Earlier the problem with solar was that the price was considered prohibitive. You did not have the economies of scale on grid, etc. But now that's been demonstrated that you can make the economic decisions to make it very viable, and I think we're doing it, etc. But there are other aspects to this, and which is that you sometimes, your economic entities are making investments, for instance, in fossil fuels outside, coal, for instance. Who's going to be importing those? Because ultimately there has to be a private sector importer, and he's referring to a large reservoir of those resources already within the country. So I think this will find its own balance, but the government will have to provide that gentle guiding hand to take it in the direction. I see both countries, India and China, moving away from fossil fuels. Remember, don't forget, we are signatories to the Paris Climate Accord. Yes. We are proud supporters of the 2030 agenda on SDGs. And so the understanding and public support is changing.
And it is but obvious that we move in that direction.
But if you want cooperation, then that cooperation has to be forthcoming in many respects. It can't be that India is buying LED bulbs. That's another area where there's large amounts of investment and purchases going to take place. We buy the LED bulbs, the Chinese sell them to us, the Chinese sell us photovoltaic, but when it comes to another area of energy, like nuclear, when it comes to the nuclear suppliers group, you face a wall. So what I have been saying, that we must take stock of the reality, which is that we need China. We need to, but we must engage them on issues of energy security at a higher political and strategic level. It cannot be a small, one of the 5 subgroups of the Niti Ayog's interaction with what they call the National Development and Reform Commission in China. This has to be much higher. And I think at a political and strategic level, we need to tell the Chinese, listen, China and India are the story of the future. China is already there. We are also going to be there. You need us. We need you. But let's accommodate each other. It's not that you buy my LED bulbs, you buy my photovoltaic panels, but I will not let you have something else which you need. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. You know, there's a lot of scope for cooperation, and it remains to be seen what really happens and how the government takes up this issue in the near future. On that note, it's time to slip into a short break now, but we'll continue our discussion right here on India's World. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching India's World. Anujesh, let me come to you now. How can India really counter China as far as its monopoly, especially in West Asia and Africa, is concerned?
So you're talking more about buying or having offshore or oil-related resources, investment by oil companies based out of India and China in these areas. I think that will always continue to happen. I was reading somewhere that the way the Chinese companies, oil companies, are empowered to invest in the international oil fields is very different from how it happens in India. In India, the our companies are required to seek a cabinet approval for all large investments, which is not the case. In China, those companies have the money with themselves and they are empowered to make the decision themselves. So they are much faster and they have sort of been ahead in acquiring resources. However, I think if we come to what we are doing within the boundaries of our country, I think India has done reasonably well in terms of so if you see the partnership, there are two aspects to it in energy. One is on the technology side, second is on the fuel side. Maybe on the fuel side, we have not been as aggressive as China. But if you come to the technology side, maybe today we are lacking in solar, LED and some of the things. But rest of the things we have picked up. If you look at the T&D equipment manufacturing facility, India is as state-of-the-art as China is. If you look at the boiler turbine generation manufacturing facility for thermal generation, India is as state-of-the-art as China is. And gradually we are picking up in all these spheres, and I think if we invest more in research and development, we could be where China is, and that's where we need to focus.
Okay, research and development is where we need to focus really, but what can India bring to the table that China can't?
Which is that we need to bring a lot on the table. In fact, what I've written in my book is especially this, that you cannot have energy security by being absolutely autarkic. India slipped into that mess 1947 by saying that we will not look anywhere in the world and we'll just depend on our sources to build up. We didn't, as Anujesh was talking about, we need to build up on R&D, Coal India and others, nobody did anything of the sort. Now, the problem with energy is the frontiers of energy, unless and until you spend a hell of a lot in terms of developing, not just right now what we are doing is we are buying off the shelf. But the problem with, say, energy supplier, say the solar guys, the coal guys, the oil flows, they are all looking for clean, efficient technologies. None of these technologies, the best technologies, would be available on the market off the shelf. You got to have your own ability, which means basically putting a hell of a lot of political commitment that we need to build these capacities. Have we done so earlier? No, we haven't. Are we looking at it now? Possibly yes, but if we are looking at it now, then the answer to even to say that we will be able to do that would mean first answering where do we look at ourselves 20 years now. Before we went in the break, that is exactly what we are discussing. That is it going to be the coal fired? Is it going to be gas fired? Is it going to be solar fired? All of them have certain distractions, possible pros and cons. Public opinion, as Ambassador Puri is saying, it can't be the way in which decisions on these are taken. These have to be very, very thought through messages, understood very well, with the implications swallowed and being followed through for the country to be able to go on a particular path of energy. It requires staying power. Again, what I've shown is that we didn't have the staying power. So those things in energy security we are just now getting to know. You referred to the issue of building up a chain of ports, friendly ports across the Indian Ocean, where we can, sort of have safe harbor facilities and all the stuff.
Right.
This is not something that you can just build overnight. The investments need to be worked through. In fact, I think Mr. Puri would know, he's headed several of those commissions, that our project implementation has been one of our weakest links, whether within India and abroad. So those things so a lot of things need to be brought in when you consider the issue of energy security. It's not just one shot or building one steel plant.
A holistic approach is required.
Yeah, and it's a countrywide. It's not just like building one steel plant or one railway line. There's a hell lot of questions that need to be brought in.
Ambassador, do respond to that, but also, India has been successful in building these strategic energy partnerships, in the Indian Ocean region, and also, Act East policy has worked well for us, but somehow we've struggled to make inroads looking west. Is it also because the fact that connectivity is a problem?
Look, there are a number of issues. I want to come back very briefly to what he said about acquisition of overseas assets. These are capital assets. And we're a democracy. Those assets are acquired either by private entities or by ONGC or companies, which also have to make decisions based on viable economic and commercial consideration. Whereas the Chinese, they have the privilege and the ability to go in, make quick decisions. Not all of those decisions do well. If you look at Chinese investments in mega projects, and these are not necessarily energy projects, but you keep bringing connectivity issues in. So I'm taking the liberty of joining. If you look at Hambantota Port as an investment, or you look at the railway line that the Chinese are building in Laos, which is going to cost $6 billion. According to the initial estimates, it's going to take them 11 years to recoup. But, I'd be surprised if it can be done in anything like 11. So that is a part of China, the state banks, which have the capacity to make those investments and forget about them. So what is happening is that a country like Sri Lanka, out of its GDP, about 65% is going in debt repayment. Now, India can't afford to get into those situations. And therefore, our approach necessarily is a much more cautious, prudent, thought through, as he says. It's a little slower, but I'd rather do that. Why do you want to acquire, or why do you want one of your economic entities to acquire, let's say, a major oil field? Which we have done. We've done that in the past. When I was ambassador in Brazil, we acquired something off the Sao Paulo basin. One of the other Western companies was selling. But oil prices are at $40 or thereabouts. So if you want to make an investment, you better have done your sums, because I don't know what the energy mix is going to look like a few years from now.
Sure.
You may have technological breakthroughs, you may have a very strong public opinion which goes against traditional fossil fuel reaction. Why we have done well in some areas and not done well in others, at the end of the day, we have to become much more organized. And whether you are able to secure a success, it depends on the kind of people who are in charge of decision making and implementing those projects. I keep coming back to one, and Subhomoy has had to suffer this for the last few days because I've been repeating it in other contexts. We need in India something which has to be called a project delivery mechanism. I raised this issue in another context and said, no, we are monitoring. I said, you're monitoring, which means you're finding out if a project is getting delayed or there's a cost overrun or a time overrun. But what do you do with it? You're telling the same guys who delayed it in the first instance to hurry up. It is not going to work.
Sure.
So you need to take that out. Then you'll get success in east, west, wherever you like.
Okay, fair enough. I've got time for one quick comment on the program now. Anujesh, close the show for us with your concluding remark with, looking forward.
So thank you for giving me this opportunity. I think, irrespective of where we are today, I think China is halfway done in setting up or meeting its energy requirements, and the path to its future growth will not be as energy intensive as it has been in the past. Till now, manufacturing has led its growth, and manufacturing will continue to play a role as significant as in the past, but future the energy intensity will change. Therefore, the most of the capacity additions around the world in generating electricity are going to happen in India. India is at 300,000 megawatts. India will certainly go to 12,000, 15,000 megawatts in the next 10 to 15 years. Therefore, India is going to be at the center stage of the developments in the energy sector in the next few years, and therefore it's all the more important for India to have friends in that journey to be able to make the best decisions.
Okay, on that positive note, then I'm going to call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. Hardeep, Puri, Subhomoy, Bhattacherjee, Anujesh, Dwivedi, thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. See you again next time.